Black Friday 2024 at MegaMart turned deadly when 5,000 shoppers stampeded toward the electronics section, and the store security guard had 90 seconds to prevent a mass casualty disaster. What the panicking crowd didn't know was that the man directing their evacuation wasn't just checking receipts. He was a former military police riot control specialist whose crowd management training had prepared him for exactly this chaos. For 6 years, Marcus Williams had been the steady presence that kept MegaMart safe during the retail chaos that defined modern shopping. As head of store security for one of the country's largest retail chains, he'd managed everything from shoplifters to unruly customers, ensuring that thousands of daily shoppers could browse and buy in a secure environment. To the staff and customers, he was simply Marcus, the professional security supervisor who somehow made crowd control look effortless even during the busiest shopping days. What they didn't know was that Marcus carried credentials that would have shocked the entire retail industry. Hidden in his apartment was an Army discharge certificate documenting 7 years with the Military Police Corps, including specialized training in riot control and civil disorder response. The same eyes that now watched for shoplifters had once maintained order during civil unrest in Iraq and Afghanistan, where crowd control meant the difference between peaceful resolution and deadly violence. Those 7 years had taken Marcus through the most challenging situations in military law enforcement. Military police officers were specialists in crowd psychology, riot suppression, and maintaining order when civilian authority had broken down. Marcus had controlled hostile crowds in Baghdad, managed mass evacuations during emergencies, and learned to read group dynamics in situations where mass panic could turn deadly in seconds. The transition from military police to retail security had been surprisingly natural. Both jobs required understanding crowd behavior, anticipating problems before they escalated, and maintaining order among large groups of people whose emotions could change rapidly. The main difference was that retail crowds were usually motivated by shopping deals rather than political grievances. But Marcus knew that excitement could turn to panic just as quickly as peaceful protests could become violent riots. MegaMart was one of the most challenging retail environments in Marcus's experience. The store covered 180,000 square feet and regularly hosted over 10,000 customers during peak shopping periods. Black Friday represented the ultimate test of retail crowd management, combining massive crowds, limited merchandise, time pressure, and the kind of competitive shopping behavior that could trigger dangerous crowd dynamics. Marcus had been preparing for Black Friday 2024 for months. He'd studied video footage from previous years, analyzed crowd flow patterns, and positioned his security team based on lessons learned from both retail experience and military police training. His goal was to manage what retail experts called controlled chaos, allowing maximum shopping activity while preventing the kind of crowd density that could become dangerous. What concerned Marcus wasn't the normal Black Friday rush. It was the perfect storm of factors that could turn excitement into catastrophe. This year's deals were particularly aggressive. The store was expecting record crowds, and social media had amplified the competitive atmosphere to unprecedented levels. Black Friday began at 5 a.m. with the usual controlled chaos. Marcus positioned himself at the store's main entrance, using crowd observation techniques he'd learned during military police training to monitor the flow of shoppers entering the store. The initial crowd was manageable, eager but orderly, following the queue system that Marcus's team had implemented. By 7 a.m., the store contained approximately 3,000 shoppers, well within safe capacity limits. Marcus conducted what the military police called crowd density assessment, evaluating how tightly packed people were in different sections of the store and identifying potential pressure points where dangerous conditions could develop. The electronics section was Marcus's primary concern. The department contained the day's most popular deals, 75% off televisions, gaming consoles, and laptops, creating the kind of high-value, limited-quantity situation that could trigger aggressive crowd behavior. Marcus had positioned additional security personnel in the area and implemented a ticket system designed to prevent the rush toward merchandise that typically caused stampedes. At 8:30 a.m., Marcus noticed the first warning signs. Social media posts were showing that MegaMart's deals were better than competitors, and additional shoppers were arriving faster than the store's capacity could safely handle. Marcus activated his emergency communication system and began implementing what he called flow control, managing the rate at which new shoppers entered the store. But Marcus's military police training was telling him that the situation was deteriorating faster than normal retail protocols could handle. The crowd density in the electronics section was approaching what riot control specialists called critical mass, the point where individual movement becomes impossible and any disruption could trigger a stampede. At 9:15 a.m., Marcus observed the behavioral indicators that military police learned to recognize as pre-riot conditions: increased agitation, pushing and shoving, verbal conflicts between shoppers, and the kind of competitive tension that could explode into violence. The electronics section now contained over 2,000 people in a space designed for 500. Marcus began implementing emergency crowd control measures, but he knew that traditional retail security wasn't designed for the kind of crowd dynamics that were developing. He needed to apply military police riot control techniques to prevent what could become a deadly stampede. At 9:45 a.m., everything went wrong. The trigger was simple and catastrophic. A social media influencer with 2 million followers posted that MegaMart was giving away free gaming consoles in the electronics section to the first 100 people who reached the display. The post was false, but within minutes, 2,000 additional shoppers outside the store saw the video and began rushing toward the entrance. Marcus watched through security cameras as the situation transformed from controlled shopping into a life-threatening stampede. 5,000 people were now trying to reach the electronics section simultaneously, creating the kind of crowd crush that Marcus had seen during civil unrest overseas. The physics of crowd dynamics became deadly. People at the back of the crowd couldn't see what was happening at the front, so they continued pushing forward, even as those ahead were being crushed against display cases and barriers. Marcus could see shoppers falling down and being trampled by people behind them who had no way to stop their forward movement. Marcus activated the store's emergency alert system and began implementing military police crowd control protocols. His first action was stopping the inflow of additional people. Marcus ordered all entrances sealed and activated emergency announcements designed to counter the false social media post. But Marcus knew that preventing additional crowding wouldn't solve the immediate crisis. He had 5,000 people compressed into a space that could safely hold 1,500, and every second of continued pressure increased the likelihood of fatal injuries. Moving through the chaos, Marcus began what military police called tactical crowd dispersal, using his understanding of crowd psychology to redirect the human pressure that was creating the dangerous conditions. The key was creating alternative objectives that would draw people away from the crush zone. Marcus activated the store's public address system with the authority he'd developed during riot control operations. Attention shoppers, electronics deals have been moved to the automotive section. Please proceed calmly to automotive for all gaming console and television deals. The announcement was strategically designed. By giving people a specific alternative destination, Marcus was applying riot control psychology to redirect crowd movement away from the dangerous compression zone. About 30% of the crowd began moving toward automotive, immediately reducing pressure in electronics. But 3,500 people were still trapped in a dangerous crush, and Marcus could see through security cameras that people were being injured. He needed to implement more aggressive crowd control techniques. Marcus began implementing what military police called sector clearance, systematically reducing crowd density by creating multiple exit routes and giving people clear, achievable objectives that would motivate them to leave the dangerous area. Working with his security team, Marcus established what riot control doctrine called pressure relief points, alternative routes out of the electronics section that bypassed the main choke points where people were being crushed. His team used hand signals and coordinated movement to guide shoppers toward exits that most people didn't know existed. The key to successful crowd control, Marcus had learned during military police training, was understanding that crowds behave like fluids. Pressure builds up at barriers and needs to be released through controlled channels. Marcus began creating those channels by opening employee passages and directing shoppers through areas that were normally restricted to staff. Marcus also implemented psychological crowd control techniques. Using the store's public address system, he began providing regular updates that gave people specific information about wait times, available deals, and alternative shopping opportunities. The goal was to replace the panic and uncertainty that drove dangerous crowd behavior with clear information that allowed rational decision-making. Attention shoppers in electronics. Current wait time for gaming console deals is approximately 45 minutes. Identical deals are now available in sporting goods with no wait time. Please consider shopping sporting goods for immediate service. The technique worked. By giving people accurate information and better alternatives, Marcus was converting the competitive stampede into a controlled shopping experience. Crowd density in electronics dropped by another 40% as shoppers chose the rational option of shopping in less crowded sections. But Marcus still had approximately 2,000 people in a space that was too small, and he could see that some shoppers had been injured in the initial stampede. Emergency medical services were on their way, but Marcus needed to ensure that the area was safe for paramedics to provide treatment. Marcus implemented what military police called tactical area control, establishing secure zones where injured people could receive medical attention while crowd control continued around them. His security team created protective barriers around injured shoppers, preventing them from being trampled while allowing the crowd to continue moving safely. By 10:30 a.m., Marcus had successfully converted a potentially deadly stampede into a controlled evacuation. Emergency medical services were treating 12 people for minor injuries, mostly cuts and bruises from falling down. No serious injuries, no fatalities, and no long-term trauma from what could have been one of the deadliest retail disasters in history. When Fire Chief Rodriguez arrived to coordinate the emergency response, she found Marcus managing a complex crowd control operation with the efficiency of someone who had been trained for exactly this situation. "How did you manage to control a 5,000-person stampede without serious casualties?" Chief Rodriguez asked. "Military police," Marcus replied. 7 years of riot control and crowd management. Same principles, different venue. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of what Marcus had prevented. Crowd dynamics experts from the National Institute of Standards and Technology analyzed security footage from the MegaMart stampede and concluded that Marcus's tactical response had likely prevented what could have become the deadliest retail disaster in American history. Dr. Sarah Chen, who led the federal investigation into retail crowd safety, explained to Marcus that Black Friday stampedes were among the most dangerous situations that could occur in retail environments. "Once a crowd reaches critical density and panic begins, the physics become deadly," she said. "People lose control of their movement, pressure builds to crushing levels, and death can occur in minutes." The video analysis showed that Marcus's intervention had broken the stampede's momentum at multiple critical points. By redirecting crowd flow, he'd reduced pressure at the main crush zones. By providing clear information and alternatives, he'd interrupted the panic psychology that was driving the dangerous behavior. By implementing systematic crowd control, he'd converted chaos into manageable order. The final casualty count was remarkably low, considering the scale of the incident. 12 people treated for minor injuries, mostly from falling down in the initial rush. Crowd safety experts noted that stampedes of similar scale typically resulted in dozens of deaths and hundreds of serious injuries. MegaMart's corporate leadership, recognizing that Marcus had saved both lives and the company's reputation, offered him a significant promotion to Director of Retail Security Operations. The company also implemented new crowd control protocols based on Marcus's military police training for all their stores nationwide. But perhaps the most significant recognition came from the National Retail Federation, which invited Marcus to develop new crowd management standards for the entire retail industry. His tactical response at MegaMart became a case study for how military crowd control techniques could be adapted to civilian retail environments. The story spread throughout both law enforcement and retail communities as an example of how military training could find crucial application in civilian settings. Marcus's successful management of the Black Friday Stampede became a model for how military police skills could be transferred to retail security operations. 6 months later, Marcus Williams was no longer just a store security supervisor. The Black Friday incident had led to his appointment as Director of Retail Safety for the National Retail Federation, a position that included developing crowd control protocols for retail stores across the country. Marcus created a comprehensive training program that brought military-level crowd control expertise to the retail industry. The curriculum included crowd psychology, stampede prevention, emergency response coordination, and what Marcus called tactical retail management, maintaining customer service while implementing security protocols that could prevent mass casualties. Security personnel at retail stores across the country learned to recognize crowd density indicators that Marcus had first studied during military police training. They practiced stampede response scenarios, coordinated with emergency services more effectively, and developed the situational awareness that could prevent mass casualty incidents before they occurred. The program was so successful that it attracted attention from the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, both of which began incorporating Marcus's methods into their national guidelines for retail security during high-traffic events. What had started as one veteran's career transition became a model for applying military crowd control expertise to civilian retail safety. Marcus's story spread throughout the veteran community as an example of how specialized military training could find meaningful application in civilian settings. Veterans who felt their crowd control and tactical skills were underutilized began to see new possibilities for service in their communities. But perhaps the most important change was in Marcus himself. During his military service, crowd control had often meant managing hostile populations during civil unrest or conflict situations. The people he was controlling were frequently angry, frightened, or actively opposing military objectives. In the retail industry, Marcus discovered a different kind of crowd control work. Every shopping day that proceeded safely, every Black Friday that concluded without incident, every retail event where families could shop without fear. These were positive outcomes where his tactical skills enabled commerce and community rather than suppressing conflict. During quiet hours when stores operated peacefully and customers shopped without knowing how close they'd come to disaster, Marcus still monitored crowds with the same tactical awareness he'd brought to riot control operations overseas. But now he understood something that had taken him years to learn. Protecting people didn't require them to be in opposition to authority. Sometimes the most important crowd control work happened in places where nobody expected to find a former military police officer. Places where stampedes were prevented before they could start. Where communities could gather safely because someone with extraordinary training chose to use those skills to protect shopping rather than suppress riots. Marcus Williams had spent 7 years managing crowds in some of the world's most dangerous situations. Now he spent his time ensuring that people could shop and gather without fear, knowing that someone with the training and commitment to protect them was watching. And in the end, he realized both missions were exactly the same, using specialized skills to protect people from harm, ensuring that human gatherings could proceed safely, regardless of whether those gatherings were motivated by necessity or commerce.